Do you ever wonder what is the best way to run D&D, Pathfinder, or whatever tabletop RPG you happen to be into? When it comes to a physical representation of gameplay, you have 4 options: Theater of the Mind, Universal Dungeon Terrain, Battle Maps, and full-blown detailed terrain. So, which of these is best for your game? Number 1, Theater of the Mind. If you're not familiar with Theater of the Mind, it's a method of play where combat takes place in the game master and players' minds. There are no grids, there are no miniatures. Everything is in your head. Naturally, Theater of the Mind can be used for both in-person and online play. A huge advantage to this style of play is that it costs nothing and is super portable. That is, of course, assuming you're able to take your brain with you everywhere you go, which most of us can, even though from time to time you do run into a person who has left their brain at home. It does happen. I have found Theater of the Mind to be a highly immersive experience because it relies so much more on our imaginations than physical combat representations such as battle maps or dungeon terrain. This often leads to more engaging and awesome stories. There's just something about imagining everything in your mind's eye that elevates the game experience in a particular way for lots of players. Furthermore, Theater of the Mind is infinitely flexible and adaptable, especially for game masters. I remember this one time my players went off the beaten path and decided to assault a keep that I hadn't planned out. Because we were using Theater of the Mind, it was fairly easy for me to just describe things: the castle walls, the guards atop them, the corridors, the rooms. Sure, I was improvising, but the fact that I didn't need to draw anything out on a battle map made that job way easier because a person's imagination just fills in the gaps that might be left. And I could basically just adapt to wherever they decided to go in that keep, and I didn't need to have any maps drawn out in advance. Now, I personally have found that with Theater of the Mind, combat is faster than with battle maps and minis or other forms of visual representation. And this may seem counterintuitive, but the trick to faster combat with Theater of the Mind is allowing yourselves to abstract and estimate positions and locations. By the way, if you want to know more about this and some other tips I have for running games with Theater of the Mind, check out my video on Theater of the Mind. I'll throw a link in the description. However, Theater of the Mind does not work too well for super tactical combat or complex fights. The thing is that exact spatial relationships, something that tactical combat and super complex fights usually rely on, are difficult to impossible to manage with Theater of the Mind. For that, you really need some sort of visual representation, even if it's a rough sketch on a piece of paper. And at that point, it's no longer Theater of the Mind. Something else that I've noticed with Theater of the Mind is that miscommunication can be a problem. What the game master describes may not be what all players understand about the combat scene. As a result, you get clarifying questions which take up some time, and if a player acts based on a faulty understanding of things, another description is usually needed and their actions might need to be walked back and redone. And if all that happens too much, the game can begin to bog down. Now, our discussion today is mostly focused on groups playing in person, but if you're like me, you also probably have some online games that use a virtual tabletop. And if you're looking for digital maps for your VTT games, you can't go wrong with Chippeku Maps. They specialize in fantasy maps, and they are absolute works of art. They cover diverse themes you can't find anywhere else. From static to animated maps, Chippeku has it all. What's more, their maps work in every VTT out there, including Alchemy, Roll20, Encounter Plus, Foundry, and Fantasy Grounds. For just $5, Chippeku patrons get access to over 4,000 maps, and $10 gets you animated maps and Foundry modules. Check out everything Chippeku has to offer at the link below. Number 2, Universal Dungeon Terrain, or UDT. Now, Universal Dungeon Terrain, or UDT, is essentially a circular platform that can be used to represent any combat. And I've usually seen it divided into 3 zones: melee, ranged, and out of range. UDT tends to be very affordable, and they are super versatile. Just one of these bad boys can be used for every single encounter you have in your game. You can buy them online for under $20 or make one yourself for probably about the same price. Also, these things are super super portable. They are basically just circles about an inch thick. The huge advantage of UDT over Theater of the Mind is that it allows you to visualize character and monster locations much better. And if you're doing zoned combat with your UDT, which is what I use when I do Theater of the Mind, it has the advantage of speeding up gameplay. By the way, if you're not sure what zoned combat is, it's actually pretty simple conceptually. As I mentioned, there are 3 zones: melee, ranged, and out of range, each represented by 3 concentric circles on the UDT. All PCs and monsters in the melee zone, that's the central circle, can strike each other with melee attacks or touch spells. Anyone in the ranged zone, that's the next circle out, can shoot ranged weapons or spells at anyone in the melee zone or anyone in the ranged zone. Finally, the outer circle is the out of range zone. Anyone there is aware the battle is taking place, but they can't make any attacks against any of the combatants, either in the ranged zone or the melee zone. All they can really do is move closer, and movement, by the way, is super simple with zones. Moving from one zone to another costs 1 movement. So if you're playing D&D, you could use your movement to cross into another zone and then attack, or you could move and dash to travel 2 zones. However, if your UDT has a grid on it, you could use it for very tactical combat where precise movement and position matters. Nothing stops you from doing that, even though I would argue that the reason to have a circular UDT is so that you can use zone combat for the advantages that it confers, namely faster gameplay. Furthermore, with UDT, you can use miniatures and basic terrain. This makes the game more visually engaging, and for those of us who love our miniature collections, like me, it allows us to put them to good use. By the way, if you want to know more about Universal Dungeon terrain, Professor Dungeon Master over on the Dungeon Craft channel has done a few excellent videos about UDT, including how to make a UDT yourself. I'll link one of them down in the description. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with others. One of the best ways you can help other game masters is by sharing helpful content. Assuming this content was helpful. If it wasn't, then don't share it and give me a thumbs down. I probably shouldn't say that sort of stuff. Number 3, battle mats. Okay, battle mats come in 3 basic designs, and I'm gonna go get mine so I can show you. Alrighty then. These bad boys right here are the ones I use quite a bit. They're basically just foldable. I came with 2 of them. They're foldable ones. So super portable. They get really big. They have grids on them and stuff. They have 2 different sides, so they had 2 different colors, and then the other one down here has 2 different sides with 2 different colors. And like, they fold and stuff, so they're really easy to take wherever you go. I've had these for like, I don't know, 5 years. They last forever. All right, next. I got these bad boys right here. I bought 3 boxes of these. I've only ever opened 1. Again, these things last forever. These are... they're basically big dungeon tile pieces thingy bobbers. They interconnect so you can lock them together like this, kind of. You got the idea. So basically, you can make these as big or as small as you need them. Mostly, they also come in little tiny ones that are 1/4 of the size, like that. I have them over here. I'm not gonna get them out for you because you can use your imagination. But anyway, again, I've had these things for, gosh, man, probably 5+ years at least, and they just last forever. They're dry erase, the dry erase, they're wet erase. They're just really cool. So yeah, and they were cheap. I think it was $20 or something for a box of these. I will say though that the box has already required the use of duct tape to start holding it together. But the tiles themselves are wonderful. All right. And the one that I don't have to show you physically is a Chessex map. These are the big ones, massive. They roll up and stuff, and they're usually made out of like rubbery type stuff. They're kind of soft. Now, many of my friends love the Chessex maps, but they've never really done it for me. They're hard to take with you. They're this big thing that rolls up. It's like, I can't fit that in my bag. I have a massive bag. It can't go in there. I need like an architect scroll case to carry these things or something. So yeah, I just never bother with those. But lots of people like them, so there you go. Okay, so as far as costs go, battle mats are very affordable. I found these foldable ones right here for $30 on Amazon. And like I said, it has 2 large foldable maps. They are double-sided, so you have 4 different colors of terrain for variations between grass and stone. I just need dry or wet erase markers and I'm good to go. And then these white puzzle ones here were about $25 each. I got them at a convention, but they were also on Amazon. Now, the thing is that battle mats give you improved visualization for characters and monsters, allowing you to use miniatures and any terrain you might have. The big advantage of battle mats over universal dungeon terrain is that you can draw out specific locations, such as a castle, cathedral, ruins, or a dungeon. And this, of course, leads to one of the big advantages of battle mats over Theater of the Mind and UDT, and that's tactical combat, where exact positions and precise movement matter. This is one of the big reasons I almost exclusively use battle mats in my own games. I love tactical combat, and battle mats excel at facilitating that. Battle mats are infinitely customizable, of course, allowing you to draw out whatever you wish. And since you can use either wet or dry erase markers on them, when you're done, you can just erase them and the mat can be used again. Shoot, you could even convert a battle mat into universal dungeon terrain by drawing some concentric circles in it. Super flexible. However, there are 3 principal drawbacks of battle maps. Battle mats. The first is that of needing miniatures or tokens to mark character and monster positions. However, that can easily be overcome by using colored buttons or pieces of candy. Reese's Pieces, by the way, are delicious, and you should definitely use them in your D&D games. And those, of course, are at a minimal cost. And these days, even miniatures and tokens are becoming more and more affordable. For instance, there's this one Kickstarter I backed called RPG Essentials, and it basically gives you a bunch of tokens featuring amazing artwork, and it's on this durable acrylic creature token type thing. It's like acrylic, hard plastic stuff with the artwork under it protected and all that kind of good stuff. And they're gonna last forever. I'm still waiting for fulfillment, but once I get those things, I'll be using those at conventions, baby. Anyway, I'll throw a link to that down below if you're interested. I'm pretty sure they're taking pre-orders still. The next con is that tactical combat and battle mats tends to slow combat down. This happens because now that location and movement are important considerations, players take a bit more time strategizing and deciding where to move. Almost everything awesome in this world comes at a price, and this is one of them. Finally, drawing out maps on the battle grid will take some time. Now, you might do this during the game, or you might draw out the maps before the game so that gameplay isn't slowed down. And then if you do the latter, you can just keep unexplored areas covered up with pieces of paper, and then remove the paper when you're ready to reveal an area. I personally draw out the map on the mat during the game because it usually doesn't take that long. It saves me some pre-game prep time, and it ensures I don't draw out areas that don't get used. Oh, and here's a pro tip if you're using battle mats. Don't draw out the entire dungeon on the mat. Instead, only draw out the area when a combat takes place. I mean, that's the only time where exact positions and distances matter anyway. And then when the group is not in combat and they're just exploring the dungeon, you can draw out a bird's eye view of the dungeon on a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I call this our heads-up display, and it allows the players to visualize the dungeon layout and know where they are. Many times groups have players do this as they explore, drawing out a map of the dungeon on a piece of paper, but I've found that it's faster if I just do it myself. When I have to explain an area several times so that a player can get the map right, that really bogs things down. And some GMs will say to only explain it once, but that's just not satisfying, especially when the characters are literally in the dungeon and would know exactly what it looks like. The room layout and everything, and where all of the different exits and entrances are. So, to save time and give precise representations, I just draw the maps myself. Everyone wins. Number 4, dungeon terrain. Okay, I probably don't have to explain what this is. We've all seen amazing photos of dungeon terrain on Reddit with titles along the lines of, "Look what I made for my players." Reddit titles kill me. And then you see an amazing dungeon with an exterior swamp filled with water and fog rising from it. You can do some absolutely amazing stuff with dungeon terrain, with the main advantage being the ability to visually represent in vivid detail the dungeon or location where the adventure takes place. This can be spectacular and result in visually striking and immersive environments. As far as tactical combat goes, dungeon terrain has many of the same advantages of battle maps. Battle mats. I'm saying that's really hard. However, Tactical combat might be even better with dungeon terrain, since you can better represent parts of the environment, lending to even more tactical options. Of course, as cool as all of that can be, dungeon terrain is your most expensive option, hands down. This stuff is generally not cheap, though there are more and more affordable options coming out. And naturally, dungeon terrain is not at all portable. like I go to conventions where I see these guys pulling on hand trucks, massive plastic tubs filled with terrain. It's either that or leave it at home. Furthermore, a game master needs to spend time in advance of the game setting up their dungeon terrain. Otherwise, gameplay can slow down drastically. Generally, what I see is the game master gets everything set up before the game, like the entire dungeon laid out on this massive table, and then they either cover the areas with paper or a large cloth. Then they roll it back and uncover things as the group adventures. If you play at a friend's house or a game shop, the lack of easy portability and the pre-game setup time required can present some challenges. Another downside is that if you are looking to represent a dungeon exactly, you may find that you don't have exactly the terrain pieces you need. This means that you either make do and your dungeon isn't perfect, which isn't that big of a deal in my personal opinion because it still looks pretty stinking cool, or you can go buy the terrain you need, meaning an added expense. Now, for what it's worth, I run into this same problem with my miniature collection. I don't always have the many I need, so many times I just make do. That's life. Finally, with dungeon terrain, you have a storage consideration, much like you have with miniatures, but the problem is much bigger. Not only will you need somewhere to store all that terrain, but you also need to be able to store it in an organized manner so that you can quickly find what you need. Just throwing everything into big tubs is less than ideal, and it's gonna take you longer to find what you need and piece together your dungeon, but it could also result in damage to all that expensive terrain. So you may be asking yourself, what is the best way to play a tabletop RPG then? I mean, isn't that what you lured us into this video with? The promise of telling us what the best way is? That's frankly a trick question. For me personally, I prefer battle mats and miniatures the most because they offer a balance between affordability, portability, and visualization. I also love tactical combat in my games, which rather rules out theater of the mind for most scenarios. What's best for you will be based on your needs and preferences. So tell me what you think. Which of these 4 styles of play fits your needs and preferences the best, and why? By the way, if you'd like to support the content my team and I create and get tons of Game Master resources you can use in your 5th edition and Pathfinder 2 games, consider becoming a DM Lair patron. You'll get a new issue of Lair magazine every month, and patrons even get to play D&D with me. I don't know what I'm doing here. Now, if you'd like to learn how to make monsters more interesting to fight so that your players aren't bored to tears in your next combat, check out this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering.